My name is Amy J. Rose. I'm 33 years old. And the night my family didn't show up to my housewarming dinner was the night I realized I had never really belonged to them in the first place. About a week ago, I bought the house I'd been dreaming about since college. It wasn't a mansion, not some absurd showpiece meant to impress strangers. It was mine. A beautiful $750,000 two-story, with a porch swing that creaked softly in the wind, a backyard big enough for summer barbecues, and a kitchen where you could actually imagine a family gathering around the table on Sundays. I had worked for this. Nearly a decade of saving, skipping vacations, living in a tiny apartment while friends upgraded to luxury condos, driving my old sedan until the engine practically begged for mercy. I told myself it would be worth it someday. When I got the keys, I cried in the empty living room, not because it was perfect, but because it proved something. I wasn't invisible, I wasn't behind, I wasn't less than. For 3 straight days, I cleaned and unpacked until my arms ached. Fresh flowers on the coffee table, matching plates and silverware arranged carefully at the new dining table. I even made handwritten name cards for everyone. I invited my parents, my younger brother Mark, my cousins, and a few close family friends. I even invited my boyfriend Ethan, who had helped me paint the guest room the weekend before. I thought this would be the moment we all sat together and felt like a family again. Ethan had kissed my forehead before leaving to pick up dessert. "They're going to love this place," he said softly, "and they should be proud of you." I wanted to believe him. The night came. I checked the roast in the oven 3 times, adjusted the music volume so it was just loud enough to feel warm, but not distracting. Smoothed down the tablecloth, even though it didn't need smoothing. 6 o'clock. I poured myself a glass of wine. 6:30. 7. The food began to cool. The candles burned lower. The silence in the house started to feel pointed. By 8, it was obvious. No one was coming. I sat at the head of my table, surrounded by empty chairs and untouched plates, listening to the refrigerator hum like it was mocking me. Then my phone rang. Dad. For a second, relief flooded my chest. Maybe there was traffic. Maybe something had happened. Maybe they were on their way and I was just overthinking. I answered quickly. "Hi, Dad." His voice was casual, too casual. "Hey, Amy," he said, as if he'd forgotten why he was calling. "So, Mark thinks the house should really be his. You know, since he's planning to settle down soon, it just makes more sense." The words didn't register at first. "What do you mean should be his?" My voice cracked at the end. He sighed like I was being unreasonable. "Well, he's starting a family with Jenna, and you're single. You'll probably just live there alone. Don't you think it would be better if you sold it to him? Or let him take over the mortgage?" My hand tightened around the wine glass. I could feel my face getting hot. They hadn't just skipped my dinner. They had skipped it on purpose. And now they were discussing my house like it was a community asset waiting to be reassigned. After the call ended, I sat there in the dim light of my dining room. The smell of the food I'd spent hours cooking turned sour in the air. My chest felt tight, heavy. It wasn't just what he said. It was how easily he said it. Like my years of saving didn't matter. Like the house had never really been mine in their eyes. That night I barely slept. I kept replaying the past few years, suddenly seeing everything differently. When Mark wanted a down payment for his car, they co-signed without hesitation. When he quit his job to figure himself out, they let him move back home, rent-free. When I got promoted last year, a major career milestone, they didn't even call. Mom texted instead. "That's nice, honey. Did you hear Mark got a new girlfriend?" The next morning I called her. I didn't want to fight. I just wanted to understand. "Why didn't anyone come last night?" I asked carefully. "I made dinner for everyone." Her tone was light, dismissive. "Oh, Amy, we were tired. Your dad worked late and Mark had plans with Jenna. You know how busy everyone is. Besides, you don't need us to celebrate. You've got your house now." "It wasn't about the house," I said quietly. "I wanted to spend time with you." There was a pause, then that soft voice she used when she wanted me to drop something. "You're overthinking this, sweetheart. We'll stop by one of these weekends. Maybe you can cook again. And about what your father said, maybe you should think about it. Mark's under a lot of pressure. It would be such a gift to help him get started." Help him get started. I had spent years getting myself started. Late nights, cheap meals, saying no to everything that cost money. And now that I had something to show for it, they wanted me to hand it over. I ended the call before my voice betrayed me. But deep down, something had shifted. And I had a feeling this was only the beginning. After that call, I told myself I would give it a day. I would breathe. I would let the shock settle. Maybe Dad had been stressed. Maybe Mom was trying to keep the peace. Maybe Mark had said something stupid and they'd repeat it until it sounded reasonable. But the next few days didn't feel like a misunderstanding. They felt like a campaign. Mark texted me like we were talking about a used couch, not the home I'd sacrificed for. Hey, heard Dad talk to you. You should really think about selling the house. It's too big for you anyway, right? You could move back into your apartment and save cash. I stared at the message until the screen dimmed. The nerve wasn't just what he said, it was the assumption underneath it. That my life was temporary, that my choices were placeholders until he decided he wanted what I had. I didn't reply. A few days later, I came home from errands with grocery bags biting into my fingers. When I pulled into my driveway, I froze. My parents' car was there, and my front door was unlocked. My stomach dropped as I rushed up the steps. The second I stepped inside, I heard my mother's voice drifting down the hallway, light and cheerful, like she was touring an open house. This room is lovely, she was saying. Mark and Jenna could do so much with this. I turned the corner and found her walking from room to room with a faint smile, while my father stood in the kitchen, hands on his hips, nodding slowly like he was inspecting a piece of real estate. Mom looked up and beamed. Amy, we were just stopping by. I didn't move for a moment. I could feel my pulse in my throat. Why is my door unlocked? Dad didn't even flinch. We still have the spare key. I didn't give you a spare key, I said, my voice quieter than it should have been. Mom waved a hand like it was nothing. Oh, sweetheart, you did years ago, when you were still in that apartment. It's for emergencies. This wasn't an emergency. This was an invasion. She walked toward my office and pointed at the doorway with excitement. This would make a perfect nursery someday, don't you think? Lots of light. I stared at her. My office. The room where I'd put my desk, my work laptop, my framed certificate from my last promotion. The room that finally felt like mine. This is my office, I said. Dad glanced toward it like he hadn't heard me. You've done well, Amy. It's a good starter home. But when you meet someone, you'll want something bigger. By then, Mark will already be settled here. It's logical. Logical. The word hit me like cold water. I set the grocery bags down slowly. I could feel my jaw tightening. I'm not selling my house. Mom's smile faltered, just a hair. Amy, you don't have to be selfish. We're thinking about the family's future. Selfish. The air changed the moment she said it, like something had been spoken into the house that didn't belong there. They left not long after, but the word stayed behind. It clung to the walls, the furniture, the quiet corners of the hallway. I spent that night pacing the living room, trying to calm the heat under my skin. I kept telling myself I was being too sensitive, that they didn't mean harm, that maybe I was making it bigger than it was. Then the calls started. Every time I talked to my parents, they redirected the conversation back to Mark. When I mentioned a project I was leading at work, Mom immediately asked if my house would be easy to childproof once Mark and Jenna moved in. When I called Dad about a small plumbing issue, he laughed and said it would be good practice for when I was maintaining the place for Mark. I could hear it in their voices. They weren't discussing a possibility. They were discussing a plan. And then came the family dinner. The first one since I'd moved into the new house. I showed up with a tight smile and a desperate hope that maybe we could clear the air. Instead, it felt like walking into an ambush. The dining room smelled like roast chicken. The table was full. My aunt smiled a little too widely when she saw me. So, sweetheart, she said, when are you handing over the keys? My cousin chuckled. Amy's going to be the family landlord. Mark sat there smugly, barely hiding his grin, swirling his drink like he was already celebrating. I tried to laugh it off at first, tried to keep my voice steady, but every comment landed like another stone on my chest. Then Mark finally said it out loud, raising his glass. Come on, Amy, you know it's the right thing to do. You don't even like having people over. What's the point of such a big house if it's just you? My stomach churned. I wanted to shout, to tell them about the late nights, the sacrifices, the way I'd live small so I could build something real. But the table was watching, smiling, waiting for me to fold. So I swallowed it. I forced a tight smile and lowered my eyes, pretending I wasn't breaking in slow motion. When I got home that night, the house didn't feel the same. It wasn't a safe haven. It felt like a target. I sat on the couch long after midnight staring at the blank TV screen. And for the first time since buying the house, I understood something with terrifying clarity. If I didn't draw a line soon, they would keep pushing until I had nothing left. 2 days later, my phone buzzed. A text from Mom. Amy, we're bringing Mark by this weekend so he can take some measurements for furniture. Make sure you're home. Measurements for furniture. My hands went cold as I read it again. They weren't hinting anymore. They were acting like the decision had already been made. I didn't reply. I set my phone face down on the table and walked out to the porch, letting the evening air hit my face. The sky was turning darker, but my chest felt like it was on fire. Plans for my home, without me, like I was just a guest in my own life. By Friday, I still hadn't responded, and I thought maybe they'd finally take the hint. I even considered leaving town for the weekend, just to avoid whatever they were trying to orchestrate. But Saturday morning, I woke up to the sound of a car door slamming in my driveway. I looked out the window, and my heart dropped. Mom, Dad, and Mark were standing by their car. Mark had a clipboard in his hand, and my father was carrying a tape measure. They were already walking up the steps. I opened the door before they could knock. "What are you doing here?" I asked, forcing my voice to stay level. Mom smiled like this was completely normal. "We told you we were coming, Amy. Mark just needs a few quick measurements so he can plan his furniture layout." "There is no furniture layout," I wanted to scream. "He's not moving in," I said instead. Dad frowned, irritation flashing across his face. "Amy, stop making this harder than it has to be. This is what's best for everyone." Before I could respond, Mark stepped past me into the house like he owned it. The audacity of it made my vision blur. "The living room's a little small for the sectional I wanted," he said casually, already pulling out the tape measure, "but we can make it work." Something inside me snapped. "Get out," I said quietly. Mark glanced at me and smirked. "Relax, we're just measuring." "Out," I repeated, louder. Mom gasped softly. "Amy, don't be dramatic." "I said get out!" The shout tore out of me before I could stop it. My voice echoed against the walls I had painted myself. Even I was startled by the sharpness of it. For a second, no one moved. Then Mark rolled his eyes, slowly retracting the tape measure. "Fine," he muttered, brushing past me toward the door. "But this isn't over." They left, but the silence they left behind was heavier than any argument. I stood in the middle of my living room, hands shaking, heart pounding so hard I could feel it in my ears. This wasn't a disagreement anymore. This was a takeover attempt. I thought my outburst would finally make them back off. I was wrong. The next week, I came home from work and saw something leaning against my front door. At first, I thought it was a package. Then I got closer. It was a bright red sold sign. My stomach dropped so fast I felt dizzy. I grabbed it and stormed inside, dialing my mother immediately. She answered on the second ring. "Hello, sweetheart." "Why is there a sold sign on my porch?" I demanded. Oh, she said lightly, almost amused. "Mark's friend works in real estate. He had one lying around and thought it would be funny to leave it there as a hint." "A hint?" My voice shook. "That's not a hint. That's harassment." "Don't be so sensitive," she replied. "We're just trying to make this easier for you. You'll feel better once you let this go." Let this go. Like my house was some sentimental trinket I was clinging to out of pride. 2 days later, it got worse. I pulled into my driveway and saw my father and Mark talking to a man in a suit. I parked behind them and stepped out slowly. "Who is this?" The man extended his hand. "I'm with L&M Realty. I'm here to do a quick appraisal." I stared at him, then at my father. "An appraisal? Who asked for an appraisal?" Dad crossed his arms. "We did. You need to know what the place is worth, so you can make a fair deal with Mark. No one's trying to cheat you." I let out a sharp, humorless laugh. "You had no right to bring someone onto my property without my permission." The appraiser shifted uncomfortably. "Maybe I should reschedule." "Yes," I said flatly, "you should." He left quickly. Mark shot me an annoyed look as he walked past. "You're being ridiculous." When they finally drove away, I sat in my car for a long time staring at the house. The house that had gone from my dream to a battlefield in less than a month. That night, Mom called again. I almost didn't answer, but some part of me still hoped for an apology, for acknowledgement, for anything resembling understanding. Instead, she said, "Amy, we've been talking. If you won't sell, you can at least let Mark stay there part-time until he finds his own place. It's only fair." My grip tightened around the phone. No. "Don't be difficult," she said gently. "Mark and Jenna are coming by this weekend with some of their things. Just be gracious." My throat closed. I couldn't speak for a moment. They weren't just ignoring me anymore. They were planning to move him in without my consent. When I hung up, I sat in the dark living room staring at nothing. The shadows felt heavier somehow. The house felt smaller. This wasn't just disrespect. This was betrayal. My own family had decided that my home wasn't mine, that my hard work didn't matter. And that's when something inside me shifted. I wasn't just angry anymore. I was done. After that call, I stopped answering. Every text, every voicemail, every fake, just checking in message went straight to my inbox. I needed space, but it didn't matter how quiet I became. They kept pushing. That weekend, I woke up early and stood at the window with a mug of coffee. The driveway was empty. For a few hours, I almost convinced myself they'd change their minds. Then just after noon, a car pulled in. It wasn't just Mark. Jenna was with him, and the trunk was open. There were boxes inside. I stepped outside before they could even open the doors. Turn around, I said. My voice was calm. Cold. Mark raised an eyebrow. We're just dropping some things off. I don't care what you're dropping off, I replied. Nothing is coming into this house. Jenna crossed her arms and leaned against the car. Why are you being so stubborn? You don't even have a roommate. This place is huge. You could use the company. The audacity almost made me laugh. This is my home, I said slowly, enunciating every word. You are not moving in. Mark stared at me for a long moment, jaw tight. Then he slammed the trunk shut. You're going to regret this, he muttered as he got back into the car. I stood in the driveway long after they left, feeling the weight of everything pressing down on me. The following week was one of the worst of my life. I couldn't focus at work. During meetings, I'd zone out, hearing Mom's voice telling me I was selfish, hearing Dad say I should do the right thing. Every time my phone buzzed, my stomach knotted, terrified I'd come home to find them inside. I stopped inviting Ethan over. I stopped cooking. The kitchen I had once been so proud of felt cold. The house no longer felt like a home. It felt like I was squatting in my own life, just waiting to be pushed out. The breaking point came on a rainy Thursday evening. I pulled into the driveway exhausted, rain tapping against the windshield. There was a note taped to my front door, in my mother's handwriting. Amy, we brought Mark by again today to look at the upstairs bathroom. He thinks it will work fine once you clear out your things. Please be reasonable. We love you. Clear out your things. My hands shook so badly I almost dropped the note. They had come back while I was gone. Again. I tore the paper down and stood there in the rain, water soaking through my clothes, my heart hammering in my chest. Inside, I sank down onto the living room floor, still drenched, staring at the note crumpled in my hand. For the first time, I wondered if maybe I should just give up. Sell the house. Take the money. Disappear somewhere far away. It would be easier than this constant war. I thought about the late nights, the missed birthdays, the promotions I clawed my way up to, the years I had lived carefully and quietly so I could build something solid. And for what? To be treated like a placeholder. I didn't cry, but something hardened. For days, I moved through the house like a ghost. Then one night, I found myself standing in my office staring at the framed certificate on the wall. The award for excellence in leadership. The same year I got my biggest promotion. The same year my parents forgot to call. And suddenly it hit me. They didn't care because they didn't have to. I had spent years trying to earn their approval. To be the responsible daughter, the one who never asked for help, the one who did everything right. And all it had gotten me was a family that thought they could take whatever they wanted from me. I sat down at my desk, and for the first time in weeks, I didn't feel frozen. I felt focused. That night, I opened my laptop and started researching. Property laws, trespassing statutes, tenant rights, harassment documentation, home security systems, trust ownership structures. The more I read, the calmer I felt. Facts were solid. Facts didn't twist themselves into guilt. The next morning before work, I called a locksmith. By noon, every lock in the house had been changed. I didn't tell my parents. I didn't warn them. I didn't answer when my mother called that evening. If they showed up again with their emergency key, they were going to find out it didn't work anymore. 2 days later, I had a security system installed, cameras at every entrance, motion sensors, a monitored alarm. I downloaded the app on my phone and stared at the live feed of my own front porch. For the first time in weeks, I felt something close to relief. Then I started documenting everything. Every text, every voicemail, every note. I created a folder on my computer labeled simply House, Screenshots, Timestamps, Photos. I even saved the sold sign incident and the unauthorized appraisal visit. If they wanted to escalate, I was going to be ready. That weekend, I quietly moved my most important documents into a safe deposit box. Passport, birth certificate, jewelry my grandmother had left me, anything irreplaceable. I wasn't paranoid. I was preparing. Ethan noticed the shift in me almost immediately. He came over one evening with takeout and found me sitting at the kitchen table surrounded by paperwork. You look different, he said gently. I am, I replied. He didn't push. He never did. He just sat beside me and listened while I explained what had been happening. The measuring tape, the appraisal, the note on my door. His jaw tightened the more I spoke. They can't do that, he said quietly. I know, I answered, and that's the point. They think they can. He reached for my hand. Whatever you decide to do, I'm with you, but you don't owe them your life. Those words landed differently than anything my family had said in years. You don't owe them your life. The following week, I met with a lawyer recommended by a coworker. We spent 2 hours going over every detail. They have no legal claim to your property, she said firmly. None. If they attempt to enter without permission, you can have them removed. If they continue harassment, we can escalate legally. Hearing that felt like oxygen filling my lungs after weeks underwater. Before I left, she suggested something else. If you want an extra layer of protection, you can move the property into a trust under your name. It makes it far more difficult for anyone to manipulate ownership or access. I didn't hesitate. By the end of the month, my house was legally placed into a trust with me as the sole beneficiary and trustee. On paper, it was untouchable. I didn't tell my parents. Not yet. Instead, I focused on myself. For weeks, I had been distracted at work, running on fumes, barely present in meetings. But once I stopped spiraling and started planning, something clicked. I threw myself into a high-pressure account no one else wanted to handle. Long hours, complex negotiations, a demanding client that had already scared off 2 other managers. Within a month, I landed one of the biggest deals of the quarter. My boss congratulated me publicly in a team meeting. My name went out in an all-company email praising my leadership and strategy. A week later, HR called me in. Promotion, significant raise, performance bonus. When I stood in my kitchen that night staring at the numbers, I didn't just see money. I saw leverage, freedom. With the bonus, I hired a landscaper to transform the front yard. Fresh grass, clean stone walkway, solar lights lining the path to the porch. It wasn't about aesthetics. It was a statement. This house is thriving, and so am I. Then I upgraded the security system even further. Doorbell camera, additional motion detection, remote alerts, and I kept documenting. The more prepared I became, the less afraid I felt. Around this time, my parents tried inviting me to dinner. The old version of me would have gone, hoping to smooth things over, hoping to restore peace. This version declined politely. I've been busy with work, I texted. Mark reached out again a week later. You've been quiet. Ready to talk about the house yet? For the first time, I responded, no, just one word. And I didn't feel guilty. Weeks passed. The pressure slowed. The calls became less frequent. The texts shorter, almost curt. It felt like they were regrouping. But I wasn't worried, because while they were plotting, I was building. I met with my lawyer again and went over every scenario: trespassing, unauthorized occupation, harassment. Together, we drafted a formal no trespass notice on official letterhead, ready to deliver if necessary. Then I took another step. I opened a separate bank account strictly for house expenses: mortgage, utilities, maintenance, everything paid from the trust. If anyone ever tried to argue that family money had been involved, the paper trail would say otherwise. I joined a gym near my office. Every morning before work, I lifted weights or ran on the treadmill. The physical strain helped burn off the emotional residue. Day by day, I felt stronger, sharper, less like the daughter trying to please, more like the woman who had built something real. One Friday evening, I sat on my porch with a glass of wine, watching the live camera feed on my phone. For the first time, I wasn't dreading a car pulling into the driveway. I was ready for it, and somewhere deep inside, I knew. If they came again, it wouldn't end the way they expected. The next couple of weeks were quiet. Too quiet. No surprise visits, no passive-aggressive texts, no fake, we just want what's best for you messages. For a moment, I almost let myself believe they had finally understood. Then one afternoon, I opened my mailbox and found it stuffed with envelopes. Not bills, real estate flyers. Every single one had a handwritten note scrawled across the front. Thinking of selling? Call us today. We have buyers ready. Top dollar guaranteed. My stomach didn't drop this time. It sharpened. I sat down on the porch steps with the stack in my lap and let the realization settle. They hadn't stopped. They had just changed tactics. That evening, I received an email from my lawyer. Please call me as soon as possible. My pulse quickened. When I called, she didn't waste time. Someone attempted to pull your property records through the county clerk's office today. The air left my lungs slowly. It's technically public information, she continued, so it isn't illegal, but given the timing, I doubt it's casual curiosity. They were looking for a weakness. Does the trust protect me? I asked. Yes, she said firmly. With the trust in place, they can't manipulate ownership. But document this. It shows intent. Intent. That word felt important. That night, I sat at my kitchen table flipping through the folder I'd built over the past month. The screenshots, the notes, the camera footage. For the first time since this started, I didn't feel scared. I felt motivated. Because this wasn't about convincing them anymore. It was about making sure they never tried this again. Then I remembered something. Months earlier, a family friend who worked at a local bank had mentioned in passing that my parents had co-signed Mark's car loan. He'd missed several payments. He was close to defaulting. At the time, I hadn't cared. Now it was context. The next day, I called him back. I kept it hypothetical. If someone defaults, I asked casually, how long before repossession happens? He explained the process, the notices, the grace periods, the final tow. By the end of the conversation, I understood something clearly. Mark's financial situation wasn't stable. They had been so focused on taking my house, they hadn't secured their own. The irony almost made me laugh. Armed with that knowledge, I refined my plan. First, I met with my lawyer again and finalized the no trespass notice. Official, documented, ready to be delivered the moment they crossed the line. Second, I strengthened the financial separation even further. Every payment tied strictly to the trust, every expense traceable. Third, psychological positioning. The next time my mother texted, it was polite. Hope you're doing well. We'd like to stop by soon. I replied calmly. Please schedule any visit in writing with at least 48 hours notice. Unannounced visits will not be allowed. It was simple, clinical. Her response didn't come for 2 days. That's not very family-like, Amy. I stared at the screen and smiled faintly. No, I whispered to myself, it's boundaries. Around this time, I started watching more carefully. Mark's social media told a different story than his bank account. Fancy dinners, weekend trips, smiling selfies with Jenna at expensive restaurants. I took screenshots, not because I needed them, but because information is power. Then one evening, scrolling absent-mindedly, I froze. Mark had posted a photo from inside my house. At first, I assumed it was old. Then I checked the timestamp. That day, my stomach tightened. I opened my security app and scrolled through the footage from earlier that afternoon. There he was, walking up to my front door while I was at work, trying the handle. When it didn't open, he cupped his hands around the glass and peered inside. He didn't break in, but he had tried. I downloaded the footage immediately, saved it, emailed it to myself for timestamp verification. Then I texted my lawyer. Got something you'll want to see. The next morning, her reply came. This is good. Good, because it proved escalation. It proved intent. And it proved I wasn't imagining any of it. With every piece of documentation, I felt stronger. Not reactive, strategic. The final piece fell into place unexpectedly. At work, the high-pressure account I had taken on expanded into a larger initiative. Leadership needed someone to spearhead the new phase. My boss called me into his office. We want you to lead it. It wasn't just a promotion. It was a statement. Higher salary, larger team, more authority. When I accepted, I didn't think about proving anything to my family. I thought about accelerating my mortgage, about locking down my independence even tighter. That weekend, I sat in my living room with a fresh folder in front of me. Legal documents, financial statements, security footage printouts, screenshots. Everything was organized. Everything was ready. They had expected me to break, to hand over the house because it was easier than fighting. But now I wasn't just defending my home. The opportunity came sooner than I expected. One Saturday morning, a group text lit up my phone. Family dinner at our place tonight. Everyone is coming. Be there at 7. Normally, I would have ignored it. This time, I saw my opening. I printed the camera footage stills. I organized the trust documents. I asked my lawyer to finalize the cease and desist letter. Then I placed everything neatly into a leather folder. That evening, as I pulled into my parents' driveway, I saw Mark's car already parked outside. The dining room lights glowed warmly through the windows. From the outside, it looked like an ordinary family gathering. Inside, I knew it was about to become something else entirely. The smell of roast chicken hit me the second I stepped inside my parents' house. For a split second, it almost felt normal. Familiar. Childhood normal. Then I saw Mark sitting at the dining table beside Jenna, leaning back in his chair like he was already victorious. Mom greeted me with that tight smile. Amy, I'm glad you came. Dad cleared his throat from the head of the table. It's time we talk about this like adults. I set my leather folder down carefully and took a seat across from them. You're right, I said calmly. It's time. Mark didn't look up from his phone at first. Finally, he muttered. We've been patient. Patient. The irony almost made me laugh. Dad folded his hands. Amy, this has gone too far. Mark and Jenna need stability. You can buy another house later. You have a good job. You're doing well. The old me would have raised my voice, would have tried to explain again how hard I worked. Instead, I opened the folder. This, I said, sliding a document across the table, is the deed to my house. They leaned forward. It's no longer held in my personal name. It's placed into a trust under my sole control. That means ownership cannot be transferred without a formal legal process that requires my explicit consent. Silence. Mom blinked. Why would you do that? To protect it. I slid another paper forward. A printed email from my lawyer confirming the attempted property record pull. Someone tried to access my deed last month. Dad's jaw tightened. We just wanted to know what it was worth. And you brought an appraiser onto my property without my permission, I replied evenly. That's trespassing. Mark finally looked up, frowning. You're exaggerating. I didn't respond to him directly. Instead, I placed a printed still image from the security footage on the table. It showed Mark at my front door, hands cupped around the glass, peering inside. The timestamp was visible in the corner. That, I said quietly, is also trespassing. The room went still. Jenna shifted in her chair, suddenly less confident. Mom picked up the cease and desist letter next, her hands trembling slightly as she read the header. What is this? It's a formal notice drafted by my attorney, I said. If any of you step onto my property again without written permission, legal action will follow. Dad's voice hardened. You wouldn't do that to your own family. I met his gaze without flinching. You thought being family meant you could walk into my house with tape measures and moving boxes. It doesn't. Mark scoffed. You're really going to threaten us over this? I leaned back slightly, calm. No, I'm not threatening, I'm informing. Then I placed one final document on the table. A summary from the bank contact. No sensitive numbers, just confirmation of multiple missed payments tied to Mark's co-signed car loan. Mark's face drained of color. I know you're under financial pressure, I said quietly, but that pressure doesn't entitle you to my home. The ticking of the dining room clock suddenly sounded unbearably loud. Mom's voice broke the silence, barely above a whisper. You've changed, Amy. Yes, I replied, I have. I stood slowly, gathering the documents back into my folder. For years, I tried to be the easy daughter, the responsible one, the one who never asked for help. I thought if I worked hard enough, if I proved myself enough, you'd respect me. My voice didn't shake. But respect isn't something you earn by sacrificing yourself. Dad stared at the table. Mark looked furious but speechless. I am not selling, I said clearly. I am not sharing. And if any of you step foot on my property again without permission, the police will be the first ones to know. I walked toward the door. Behind me, the dinner sat untouched, steam fading into the air. As I reached the hallway, Mom's voice followed me. This is extreme. I paused without turning around. Showing up at my house with moving boxes was extreme. Leaving notes telling me to clear out my things was extreme. Trying to appraise my property without consent was extreme. Then I opened the door. What I'm doing, I said quietly, is self-respect. I left them sitting in silence. But that dinner wasn't the end. It was the line. The next week, I followed through. I posted no trespassing signs along the property line, filed copies of the cease and desist letter with the local police department, sent formal notice that all future communication regarding my house must go through my lawyer. 2 weeks passed. Then Mark texted, You didn't have to humiliate us like that. I stared at the screen for a moment before replying. You did that yourselves. And for the first time in months, I slept peacefully. The silence after that dinner was different. Not tense, not heavy. Quiet. 2 weeks went by without a single call. No passive-aggressive texts from Mom, no lectures from Dad, no smug messages from Mark. Then one morning, my phone lit up. 3 missed calls from Mom, 2 from Dad, 1 long message from Mark. Wow, guess we're not invited to your little party anymore. I hadn't told them about the housewarming, because I hadn't invited them. A week after the confrontation, I finally threw the celebration I'd originally planned. Not for validation, not to prove a point. For myself. The house was full that night. Friends from work, a couple of neighbors. Ethan standing beside me in the kitchen, laughing as he handed out drinks. Music playing. Real laughter filling the rooms. Someone raised a glass and said, Amy, this place is incredible. You should be proud of yourself. I felt something warm settle in my chest. I was. I posted a few photos later. Smiling faces around the dining table that had once sat empty. Candles lit. Plates full. Life. I didn't tag my family, but I knew they'd see it. The messages that followed were predictable. Mom tried guilt. Family is all we have. Don't throw it away over a house. Dad tried authority. You can't keep us out forever. We're your parents. Mark tried anger. You think you're better than us now. Enjoy playing queen of the castle while it lasts. I didn't reply. Then came the one that made me pause. Just so you know, Mom texted. We went to the police about those letters. They said you can't stop us from visiting. We're your family. I forwarded it to my lawyer. Within 24 hours, she sent a certified letter outlining the legal consequences of trespassing, attaching copies of the security footage showing Mark attempting to enter my property. 2 days later, Dad sent a short message. "Fine, have it your way. Don't expect us to come around anymore." I read it twice, and I smiled. Because for the first time, I realized something. They weren't threatening me. They were withdrawing control. The real fallout came quietly. A few weeks later, as I drove home from work, I passed my parents' house. Mark's car was being loaded onto a tow truck. I didn't slow down. I didn't smirk. I just kept driving. That evening, a neighbor sent me a screenshot of a social media post Mark had made, a vague rant about people who think they're better than everyone else, about how everything falls apart when you can't trust your own family. I didn't comment. I didn't react. Silence can be louder than any argument. Months passed. The calls stopped entirely. No more surprise visits. No more notes. No more reasonable suggestions about giving up what was mine. The house felt light again. Warm again. I painted the guest bedroom a soft cream color, planted flowers in the backyard, turned my office into a space I genuinely loved working in. Ethan came over more often. Sometimes we cooked together. Sometimes we just sat on the porch swing in the evenings, talking about everything and nothing. One quiet night, nearly 6 months after that first empty dinner table, I was sitting alone on the porch, watching the sunset spill gold across the sky. A car slowed down in front of my house. My chest tightened for just a second. It was my parents' car. They didn't pull into the driveway. They just idled at the curb for a moment. Then they drove away. I didn't wave. I didn't call after them. I just kept rocking gently on the porch swing, listening to the quiet hum of evening settling in. This house wasn't just wood and stone. It was a boundary, a line I had drawn, and defended. I finished the last sip of wine in my glass and set it down carefully on the railing. "This is my home," I said softly into the fading light, "and it always will be." Then I stood up, walked inside, and locked the door behind me. Not out of fear, but out of choice.